A little tough, because this beginning point of explaining some of the principle that will continue, that will not continue, those kind of issues are going to be a little tough. So what I want you to listen very carefully as we progress in our class. Okay, so we looked at, what did we look at yesterday? Remember, we were ending, like God's immutability supplies necessary connection between dispensations. So we were looking at connections between dispensations, how this is connected. That's what we looked at. Today, we need to look at point number 2. The concept of progressive revelation supplies additional cohesion to dispensational theory. Right. We are going to look at some additional understanding to this dispensational theory. How are we going to understand? And especially progressive revelation. Remember, yesterday I wrote down a chart, right? How that happens, like something like this. I hope you remember that one. Like, so imagine you have 7 dispensations, and here is the first one, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, for example, innocence, human government, innocence, conscience, human government, promise, law, church, kingdom, right? So if you take 7 dispensations and look at that in terms of revelation, right? It was the revelation that God gave to the first group, that is Adam and Eve, was very limited, right? Very, very limited. But then for the second group, it was much more, including what the previous ones had. So it is progressive. Revelation was progressive from the beginning. So that means we know a lot more than what Adam knew, what Abraham knew, what David knew, right? A lot more here we knew because of the progressive revelation. And in the coming kingdom, in the millennial kingdom, there will be much more revelation is going to come, right? That means people who are going to be in the kingdom will know much more than what we already know now, right? That is what progressive simply means. So let's look at progressive revelation and what it does. Progressive revelation, while not discontinuing unifying themes, understand that whole of the divine plan is neither immediately revealed or monolithic, like, everything in uniform in nature. No, progressive revelation doesn't believe that everything is monolithic, like uniform. Revelation is uniform, or it was immediately revealed. No, instead, we use, Bible use the word mysteries, right? That is from a human perspective. What is mystery? Something that was hidden, and it was revealed, right? Revealed. So when something that was hidden in the past but revealed later, this is known as mysteries. All right. So involves surprise disclosures about divine decree that shape the unfolding of human history. God's revelation was not given all at once, but was unfolded progressively. How? As God willed to give it, number 1. Number 2, as men were prepared to receive it. So God gave the revelation. How? Number 1, when he wanted to give, he gave. Number 2, when men were able to receive. For example, in the beginning itself, if God was talking to Adam about the birth of Jesus, the cross of Christ, the death on the cross, Adam will not be able to receive it because he's not prepared, right? So it took time as men were able to prepare it. And we have an important verse here that is from Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1, right? So let's read this verse. Can one of you please read Hebrews 1, verse 1?
God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets.
Yeah, what was the first word? Says God
who at various times and in various ways.
Okay, various times and various ways. Here in, I think, let me see how NISB is. 1 second. I wanted to. Okay, Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1. Now, so you're reading from King James, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
NKJ.
Okay, New King James Bible, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, in the old King James, sundry times, diverse manners, right? That is the oldest King James. And NIV says many times and many ways. Or no, so no, that's not the NIV says. NIV says many times and various ways, right? They all says various ways, many ways. I'm looking at NSB, many ways. All right. Yeah, all of them says many ways. Okay. Well, what I wanted to say, it is actually the it is better translation is that better than many times and many ways. It should have been better translated many parts and many portions. Most of the modern translation, I think, have done an injustice to the text. Should have been done many parts and many portions. God revealed himself through many parts and many portions. That's the way it should have been translated. So, what covenant theology thinks in this progressive revelation? What do covenant theologians say? Covenant theology effectively denies the principles of progressive revelation by, I'm saying they are denying effectively the principles of progressive revelation by embracing New Testament theology into its Old Testament exegetical grid. What covenant theology would always say, they say New Testament priority. New Testament priority. That means you have to interpret the Old Testament in the light of New Testament, right? That is what covenant theology would always do. And therefore, what they say, for example, covenant theology claims to believe in progressive revelation. Yes, there is a claim that they believe in progressive revelation. And sometimes historically been used even the term dispensation to describe this progression. All right? Even the word dispensation is used. But for covenant theology, dispensation is a segment of a single covenantal administration. All right? It is a segment of a single covenantal administration. For example, Hodge, a covenant theology. He writes, although the covenant of grace has always been the same, the dispensations of that covenant have changed. Look at that. So this is Hodge is a covenant theologian. I think I have sent you the theological book of him. He is a covenant theologian, and he thinks that yes, the covenant of grace has always been the same, but the dispensation of the covenants have changed. Another covenant theology known as Louis Berkhoff. Berkhoff writes, covenant of grace as it is revealed in the New Testament is essentially the same as that which governed the relation of the Old Testament believers to God. All right, so what we have to understand, yeah, they believe in the progressive revelation, right? But still they look at the Old Testament and the New Testament as same. as a single thing. This explains why, for instance, endless material has been written on finding the Trinity, especially Christ and his atoning work in the Old Testament, even though the full disclosure of these doctrines did not occur until the first advent. So what happened? What covenant theologians have done, they would say, one of the major work, their focus was finding Christ in the Old Testament. Especially they would say in every verse there is Christ, right? Every verse there is Christ. And they were trying to see, not only looking for Christ in every verse, they were looking for the atonement in every verse. So that was the main thing that they were doing, because the quest is driven by a theological expectation of continuity on the part of covenant theology, because they believed that, yes, the doctrine or the covenant of grace is just only one, and therefore it should be the same. That means there should not be major differences between these testaments. All right, so they were looking for continuity, right? So that is one of the main things that we need to understand. Now, here, when I say something, when I say something about the atonement, as a dispensationalist, yes, I do believe that every Old Testament saints, OT saints, all the Old Testament saints are saved by by the instrumentality of faith, right? Through faith. Right? Through faith. I am saying it begins from Adam. Adam was saved through faith, right? And they are saved on the ground. Let me put that one. Ground of Christ's saving work. Right? So, now, all the Old Testament believers were saved on the merit of Christ, on the ground of Christ's cross work. But I am saying, Old Testament people were not saved based on their faith. It's not that they believed in the. They were not saved. Okay, it's not by faith in Christ's cross work. Faith in Christ's cross work. Okay. What I'm saying here, what is the difference? This is one. This is how, when we talk about covenant theology and, and the way that I see, I don't know how other dispensations would explain or see this one, but how I see is that, yes, how the Old Testament believers were saved. Number one, they were saved through faith. I am saying they are saved through faith in the promises. Right? So, promises that God gave at that time. What are the promises that God gave? Saved through the promises. And their salvation was grounded on the Christ coming atoning work. The ground of their salvation is Christ's death. But let me make a difference. They were not saved through the faith in the cross work of Christ. They are not saved through a faith, because I am saying God has not revealed anything about Christ's death or the cross work or resurrection or any of these things in the beginning of after Adam, in those beginning times. But still they were saved because they believed God's promises. So I am saying what Adam had to believe. Adam had to believe Genesis 3:15. That promise. But the ground of their salvation is Christ's atoning work, because no one can be saved without Christ's sacrifice. No salvation at all. But it does, for us, those who are after the cross, now we need to believe not simply the promises that God gave to Adam or Noah or Abraham or Isaac or Moses or David. We have to believe much more. We have to believe the cross work of Christ. We have to exactly believe, that Christ died for us and rose again on the third day. Yes, our content is much more broader to be saved. But that is not the content of faith for all the Old Testament people. It was different from one time to the other time. So, yes, go ahead.
One confusion. The content is the same, Old Testament or New Testament.
I'm saying it is different.
Different in the details, but otherwise the main focus is there will be a Messiah and Messiah will redeem.
Yes. So that is what Genesis 3:15 says, right? So my point is, everyone is saved through faith, right? Faith is the instruments of salvation. Now, what is the content of the faith?
Yes.
That is the question. What is containing in this faith? All right. I am saying it differs. It is different. It was different from, for each, I'm saying in each dispensation, these contents were different. Right? Contents were different.
Yes.
Okay. So what you and I believe now about the sacrifice, the death of Christ, is far different. I mean, far lesser information than Adam or Noah had. Very little information. So the content of the faith is different, but the instrumentality is the same, that is faith. I am adding one more thing here. The ground of their salvation from Adam onwards is the death of Christ. Okay? Even though it has not happened, people can be saved only through the death of Christ. But the question should be asked, I think that what I'm trying to make, should Adam have to believe that Christ will die on the cross and be resurrected on the third day to be saved? I am saying not necessary, because there was no revelation at all at that time. So how can they believe which they have no revelation, right? So, and I'm saying again, the content of the faith when the nation Israel started is much more different and much more broad than what Adam had to deal with. So that's what I'm saying. Okay. Salvation is by grace through faith all the time. Right? Salvation is by grace through faith all the time. The question is, the content of that faith is different. Now let's look at next the point number C, dispensational conception of progressive revelation, however, provides explanation both for continuity and discontinuity lays throughout biblical record, right? I think it is dispensationalism that helps to explain both areas. What are the things that will continue in these dispensations, and what are the things that will not continue in these dispensations? So let's look at, first of all, discontinuity. While covenant theology insists, all right, what do they say? Church is spiritual Israel. That is what covenant theologians insist. Church is spiritual Israel. It cannot explain why many laws designed to distinguish Israel from its ancient Nearest culture no longer find application for the church in her modern culture. All right. What is the problem? We know that covenant theology stands. Covenant theology says church is spiritual Israel. But the problem is that covenant theology cannot consistently explain many laws that are given to Israel, which is actually to distinguish Israel from other Canaanite religion, to distinguish itself from other Canaanite culture. God has given the law, right? For example, look at this one. While it is no longer necessary to refrain from mixing seed, mixing fabrics, and plot teams today, why? Why it is not an issue to mix the seed now, mix the fabrics now, mix the plot teams today? But God clearly said, when Israel was as a nation functioning, God said you should not do it. Should not do this way. Why? Now, why it is not applicable to church now? Right? Okay. Is the need for separation so vital for the Old Testament Israel no longer necessary in the anti-Israel? Right? So, God was so concerned about separation from other any culture for Israel. Why we don't have to be separated like Israel? Why we don't behave like Israel? It is hard for the covenant theologians to explain it. For example, another one. Why did eating pork become abruptly acceptable in Acts 10? Did pigs suddenly lose all their negative association at that time? Because that was some people were suggesting. Why it is okay now? Why it was not okay for Israel? It's hard for covenant theologians to bring up with good explanations. I think everyone would explain. While covenant theologians go extraordinary lengths to distinguish apodictic and caustic laws. All right, what is that in two terms? Let me say how do they explain the law? What is apodictic? Apodictic means, for example, 10 commandments are apodictic. That means do not do this, do not do this, do not worship idols, or yes. So these are all apodictic, just directed commands. Directed commands are apodictic laws. What is caustic law? Caustic laws are conditional in nature. If this is, then this is what you need to do. All right, that is what it simply means. So covenant theologians, divide the law this way to explain, and they also would divide the law into civil, ceremonial, moral laws to resolve this tension. Yeah, civil law, they say, okay, now civil law, ceremonial law, moral law, they divided the Old Testament law into three categories. Covenant theology, that's what they did. Still, they are unable to discover a completely consistent division and to explain why abrogation of especially civil laws happened at the cross. The answer would be yes, at the cross everything is fulfilled. So only the moral law continues, rest of the laws are fulfilled on the cross. That is the logical explanation. But it is not that logical to explain how civil laws are fulfilled on the cross. That is the difficulty with the covenant theology, how civil laws were fulfilled on the cross.
Not able to understand, Pastor. Can you give an example?
I am saying, for example, just let's take an example of this one. They would say, okay, about mixing seed. Israelites are not supposed to mix seeds. They are not to mix fabrics, not supposed to mix plow teams. Like you cannot have a donkey and a bull together to plow. You're not supposed to, right? So God has given commandments to Israel to function. These are all much to tell that, yeah, you need to be different from any culture, the Canaanites' culture, right? That is these commands are given. So these are all part of the law. You talk about 613, I think, right? 613 laws. These are all part of the laws. Now, how do we, covenant theologians explains that this is spiritual, church is spiritual Israel. So how do they explain? That is what I said. They would say, they divide the law, and this is so famous, right? Even sometimes dispensationalists would fall into this trap. Yeah, I understand. Even some of the good people, good theologians would, even sometimes dispensational would explain that way. But I am asked, looking at it that one, you divide the law. I am saying law cannot be divided at all, right? According to James, you cannot divide that. It is one. It's the different aspects. Yes, it is to explain. I understand it is for explanation. I can get that one. But my question would be, is that yes, covenant theologians would always say civil law, civil and ceremonial, like, ceremonial, those are used for worship, are fulfilled at the cross. So they don't continue. And only moral law now continues. That's what covenant theologians explain. The question is, how do you explain that civil law is fulfilled on the cross? For example, how do you explain this mixing seed, fabrics and plow fulfilled on the cross? How do you explain? Yes, we can understand the law concerning sacrifice. Yeah, it's no longer, doesn't have to, because Christ is once for all sacrifice. But how about civil laws? For example, okay, how do I say? Yeah, for example, when you plow the ground, remember, when you plow the ground, what do you need to do? When you even harvest, you should not. Yeah, what is the rule? Yeah, I mean, when you harvest your field, what you should do, you should not harvest in the corner, right? You should not harvest in the corner, right? That is the Jewish law. What is that? The corners are left for the poor people. Left for the poor people. Now, so you look at all these civil laws, how this is fulfilled on the cross. That is how this is, how do we explain these civil laws happened at the cross? That is a problem. Another one, to defend the subdivision of law in view of the text like Matthew chapter 5, 17, 19. Right? How do we explain? Let's look at this verse for a while. Let's look at James chapter 2, verse 10. James chapter 2, verse 10. Can we read?
For whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles at just one point is guilty of breaking all of it.
Yes. Whoever keeps the whole law and stumble at just one point is guilty of breaking all of it. It is a clear statement. James says that this is law is indivisible. You cannot divide law. Look at Galatians 5:3.
Again, I declare to every man who lets himself be circumcised that he is obligated to obey the whole law.
Yeah. He is obligated to obey the whole law. If how do we explain that? Now let's look at Matthew 5. Matthew 5. Matthew 5, verse 17 to 19. Let's read those three verses.
Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Everyone who breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah, so until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, nor the least stroke of a pen, it's talking about the law, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Look at that one. Until everything is accomplished. So Jesus says, I came to fulfill. All right. So until everything is fulfilled, nothing can disappear. So how covenant theologians would provide a better logical answer? It is very, very hard for covenant theologians to answer some of these very difficult questions. Yeah, because it's not that easy to divide the law into three groups: civil, ceremonial, moral. Yes, maybe you can explain that way, but as far as law is concerned, it is just one. So Jesus says, until everything, I have come not to abolish the law, but to fulfill. So Jesus is the fulfillment of the law. Jesus says, yeah, until it is fulfilled, nothing can be removed, right? So if Jesus is a fulfillment of the law, Jesus is the fulfillment of the law, then how can we say that we are somehow under the Mosaic law, especially moral law, right? So that is the problem that we face here. Right now, Dispensationalism has a simple or airtight solution. What is the dispensationalism solution? Church is not Israel. Right? Church is not Israel. And thus, we are not bound by her laws. That is a simple explanation. Instead, church is governed by a specific and previously unrevealed stipulations of the New Testament. Mosaic law has been set aside in its entirety, and a new legal code replaces it. So the way the dispensationalists would say, yes, we don't believe the church is, a spiritual Israel. No, we don't see it that way. We believe that, yes, the law has been fulfilled. Everything that is said in the law, the law, Jesus is the fulfillment of the law. And not only that, church is not Israel. So church doesn't have to do anything, any requirements of the law, any requirements of the law. That is what dispensationalist argument. All right, so we are looking at the arguments of covenant theologians. What do they on discontinuity, right? What we are looking at? Discontinuity. What doesn't discontinue? Covenant theologians would say church is spiritual Israel, so moral aspect might continue, rest of the things doesn't continue. That's how they explain. And they say, yes, the law, they also say the law is fulfilled in Christ, but then there is a problem they face. But yes.
Pastor, one confusion.
Mm-hmm.
When we say that Mosaic law has been set aside in its entirety, we are very sure that the 10 commandments have been repeated by Jesus, accepting the Sabbath law. You have clarified that. But the question I want to clarification is, out of the 613 laws that he gave to the Jewish people, are any one of such a nature which have not been covered by in the New Testament, Pastor?
Okay, and what I will do, what I want to do is that I am saying there are little problem in the explanation of dispensationalism as well, right? So I wanted to take some time, maybe I don't know whether I will be doing today, I am planning, but I wanted to take some time and explain how we can understand this continuity and discontinuity. Now, because this is, I know that question, okay, but this is more than what we say. Okay, is there anything repeated from the Old Testament? Right, there are many things are repeated, right? But still, there are few things that are not repeated. That's my problem. But still, is it relevant today? Right? Still, it is relevant today. That is the struggle for dispensationalists.
Okay.
Right. So I am going to maybe answer your question later, so that we get some proper clarification. Right?
Thank you, Pastor.
Okay. And when I'm saying we have not come to a conclusion now, but we are offering what covenant theologians argue, what dispensationalists say. Right. Okay. We will go and we'll see. Okay. So we are looking at discontinuity. Now let's look at continuity. The new revelation is progressive, suggests that, there are intersecting and unifying themes that connect dispensation. So for dispensations, you can hear sound, okay, no problem. Are we asking anything? Okay, if you're asking, you can ask question at any time, right? Any doubts you have, you ask me during the class, right there when you have a doubt. If you write the questions, I may not be able to answer right there, right? Okay, anything you can ask. Just turn on your mic, ask it, right? Like what some others, like Sudhir brother does. So, continuity. The new revelation is progressive. It suggests that there are intersecting and unifying themes that connect dispensation. Dispensations are not hermetically sealed units. Hermetic means, the Hermes is I think he's a Greek god, right? Greek god who is a Greek god of travel. Hermes is a Greek god of travel, and he has the capacity when the ship has a leakage, he can suddenly, just with the magical power, he can close the leakage. That's the idea that is used there. Dispensations are not hermetically sealed units, not one one single unit. Okay, one is for example, innocence, one single unit, no continuation, just completely separate. No, that's not the way, but it is interconnected pieces of a single unfolding plan. Whatever may be, because there are some people who have different opinion on that single unfolding plan. This is not to say that God amends the irrevocable terms of previous covenants, but rather there are developing elements of the single divine decree, which is kingdom. There are redemptions. A lot of decrees are there. A lot of aspects of the decrees are there that can continue in these various dispensations. This also means that there are common and transcendent moral elements sourced in the immutably righteous standard of God, right? There are some moral elements and that are binding in all dispensations. So dispensation believes that there are a lot of things continue. Yeah. They don't think there are absolutely no continuation at all. Not like that. Dispensationalists do believe things are continuing, right? And there may be principles that commence in one dispensation and will continue in all succeeding dispensations, right? This concept actually have been only weakly explored by contemporary dispensationalists. They have not spent much time on this one, right? So what do we have to do? We have to look at what continues, what doesn't continue, right? Which is known as trans-dispensational, right here. This is what I wanted to explain, and this is going to be, which will take some time, what continues, what doesn't continue. Don't think that dispensational simply thinks, okay, everything completely different. That's not the way dispensationalism teaches. It's a little different. So we wanted to spend some time. It's going to be a little difficult. And I think I will take Monday 1 hour to explain what is this trans-dispensational. What are the things that will continue from the beginning onwards, right? And how are we to understand, how dispensations should understand this? If they wanted to make a logical explanation for many things that are repeated in the New Testament and things that are even not repeated in the New Testament.